Hey, did you know Atomic Heart 2 is in development? Let's get into everything we know about the game, and with that out of the way, let's get right into it. Our story starts as early as 2021, that was 2 years before the first game even launched, but the studio behind the project, Mundfish, was already announcing Atomic Heart 2. They even clarified that it was not a joke, but they believe in the game's success and will continue to develop the universe. They continued on saying there was a subtle secret in the first game and a layer of story that most players won't notice that will unfold in the sequel. They said clues were also hidden in the E3 trailer. I'm not sure what subtle secret the team was referencing, but it's nice to hear a studio so confident in their work, especially in a world where most studios are very cautious about announcing sequels before seeing original results. But I respect Mundfish for being so confident in their work that they knew they would continue working on the franchise. Moving on to 2023, on the By the Way show, the studio head of Mundfish more formally discussed Atomic Heart 2. Robert said that Atomic Heart was a success for the studio and the game had already recouped all the costs to develop the game. The more interesting quote was when discussing what Atomic Heart 2 will be. Robert said Fallout is more RPG than the first Atomic Heart. He said Atomic Heart will have more RPG elements similar to Fallout, and we will hear more about that later, but the studio really wants to lean into the RPG elements for this game. I think that's a great progress for the series, and I think looking at Fallout as the standard is a great way to move the series forward, especially if they want it to be more of an RPG title. Let's jump to 2025, where we got our first look at the game during the Summer Game Fest 2025. We were given a trailer for Atomic Heart 2. And wow, the trailer is awesome. Mundfish knows how to put together a great show. We get to see new characters, locations, weapons, and this bigger world we will be exploring in this game. Traversal also looks great with the car that can turn into a robot and grappling hooks. And we see P3 back as the protagonist, and we get a look at the returning Golden Ballerina twins. The game will have similar themes to the sequel. We are told we will explore diverse geopolitical regions and the ethics of artificial intelligence and control. And the website gives an additional description of the story, which says, quote, "The story continues, a gripping plot with mysteries and high stakes, where beloved characters return and new ones help the world unfold from completely different sides. Much as its predecessor, Atomic Heart 2 is set in the alternate history retro-futuristic universe and expands to a global scale, introducing new heroes, dangers, and returning beloved characters." End quote. Similar to what the studio had mentioned earlier, but the website highlights on the expanded RPG systems that immerses players in a living game world filled with various activities. And the final information from the website I want to cover here is about combat. The site says the enhanced combat system will let players use both hands simultaneously, combining glove abilities with a wide array of melee and ranged weapons, which in and of itself feels very much similar to the jump from Bioshock 1 to Bioshock 2 with being able to use both hands. Following the announcement of the game and the trailer, the game director did an interview with Polygon and gave some additional details about the game. He starts by saying that with the release of the fourth and final expansion, that whoever is alive after that will have a role in Atomic Heart 2 in reference to characters, which shouldn't be a surprise. Mundfish has spent all this time building up these characters and world, and they don't want to move past these characters yet. He continues on and discusses the whole transportation system we see in the trailer. It's not that important for this video, but I want to cover it because it's interesting. Robert said, quote, "In the sci-fi of the 60s, there was a very common theme of human evolution and the ambition to go beyond the limits. The Atomic Heart 2 story is actually the beginning of this movement. There will definitely be a lot of drama, and we're not going to spoil that, but yes, it's the beginning of transformation of people to leave the Earth and move to the stars." End quote. Which is awesome to hear. I think going to space is also a natural progression for this series, similar to adding RPG elements. The article clarifies the game will still take place in Facility 3826, but will expand into the larger region known as Polygon Science. The facility is dedicated to deep science exploration, and the main purpose is the exploration of the closest planets like Mars and Venus. He also touches on the flying city we see in the trailer. He says, quote, "Those flying cities, they represent different cultures, different countries that get engaged in the events of Atomic Heart 2. The flying cities are capitalistic, and they are basically floating above territory of the facility. They're attracted to the facility, and there will be certain events in the Atomic Heart universe that capture the interest of scientists from all over the world, and this facility becomes the center of gravity for the whole science community from different countries and cultures." So we didn't get a lot of details from this article, but we should take away that the world building is larger in this game, and there will be a lot more world to explore this time around with a mix of new and old characters. Then we can move to discuss the WccfTech article. They were able to interview the CEO of Mundfish, and he starts by confirming the timeline. He says this game will take place a few years after the first game and will address the multiple endings of the first game. I guess there was also some fan concern if the game will have a more Western vibe because of the trailer that was released at the Summer Game Showcase. Robert said they are not abandoning the art direction and atmosphere of the first game, which makes sense. I never thought this game would be a Western based off of one trailer. In terms of the trailer itself, Robert said the trailer was captured using Unreal Engine 5 and was a mix of gameplay footage and in-game cinematic. He said he didn't want to discuss gameplay too much, but hopes fans see they are evolving the combat system with the glove abilities, encounters with enemies, and boss fights. He says he thinks the game will still be a single-player personal journey when asked about multiplayer and if they would ever consider adding it to Atomic Heart. And he kind of clarifies that Mundfish's new project, The Cube, will be the game with multiplayer elements, and I think they want to keep Atomic Heart as single-player only moving forward. He goes on to say P3's story isn't over yet, but they aren't ready to reveal exactly how or in what capacity, and they aren't ready to discuss playable characters yet, which I'll put an asterisk in because I want to talk about it later, but it is interesting that they aren't able to discuss playable characters, which makes me think that P3 will not be the only playable character this time around, and we might even see multiple protagonists in this game. When asked about vehicles and traversal options, Robert was asked if the game can be considered open world. He said this was done in response to players wanting to explore more of Atomic Heart 1. He said the sequel is more open in structure, and they are building larger interconnected spaces that offer more freedom in how you explore, revisit, and engage with different systems, which vehicles and traversal tools are a part of. And he said there will be an environmental systems, which includes a day and night system and weather. So he didn't outright say it'll be an open world, but more open than the first game with interconnected spaces, and I think open world adjacent. When asked about the RPG system in reference to the earlier Fallout comments, he said they want the world to feel responsive and an evolving system. In terms of the RPG elements, he said there will be deeper weapon customization, skill trees, and progression paths that will allow players to shape their playstyle much more than before, and that activities to do between missions will be handcrafted and not checklist activities that are in other open world games. One of the last topics he talks about is how players' choice will impact the narrative. He says choices will matter in this game and actions will influence how certain events or missions unfold, and that there will also be companions in game. And the final question he was asked about was release date. Robert said this game is in active development, so it's out of the prototype phase and well past the prototype stage, but they are still a few years out from release, and more updates will come as the studio hits key milestones. Overall, this sounds like the ideal sequel. The team is broadening what worked in the original and is making the sequel bigger in every way. They are building out the world and making it more open, giving more enemies and bosses to fight in the world, and giving players more weapons to fight in that world. We will have traversal and vehicles to explore in this new world, all while making choices that will impact the story and having companions with us. Let's close out with my thoughts. I think Mundfish handled this IP perfectly. They took feedback from the first game and used that in the DLCs they developed, and are now taking all their learnings from the original game and DLC to this sequel. I'm very excited for this game, and I think Mundfish is a studio to watch out for. I think it's interesting the studio is teasing potentially multiple playable characters besides P3. In terms of release, we are many years away. I wouldn't expect a release until 2028 at the earliest. I think we will get news throughout the next few years, but I wouldn't expect a release for a while. And that is everything we know about Atomic Heart 2. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.